The best turnout we've ever had at the beginning of a church camp. Can you all give yourselves a big round of applause? All right, as we invite Pastor Karl to, do we call you Pastor Karl or Karl?
Karl's fine.
Yeah, Aussies, we tend to just go with the first name. We don't do the honorific thing. The Filipinos will all call you Pastor Karl, so they have a culture of honorific titles. So, just as Karl comes, would you come, brother? I'd like to just give you a welcome gift, and the welcome gift is the short history of Morrison Chapel. So we just want you to be with us and light reading this evening. Can we have a very, very warm round of applause? Karl, all the way from the land down under.
The stand for me. Thank you. It is good to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. You sit here in Macau and in Hong Kong, kind of on the edge of two huge cultures, and you're impacted by, my understanding is you're impacted, thank you, by both cultures. What we wanted to do,
Karl,
yes.
I forgot to release the kids.
Oh, okay.
When do we get to go to the bar?
I'm really interested.
You might want to stay for, going to the children's program is not compulsory. You can stay with Pastor Karl if you want. So if you're age 6 to 12 and you want to go to the kids program, Selena is there, and would you, all the boys and girls, would you please go? And Mary and the little ones will be going as well. Thank you very much. Let's give the boys and girls, may God's blessings surround you each day as you trust Him and walk in His way. Presence to me, God and keep you from sin. Go in peace, go in joy. It's supposed to be 16. It doesn't look like 16, does it? Maybe some of them are staying to hear it. I'm sorry, it's my usual level of incompetence. Thank you very much. Let's have a very big round of applause for Pastor Karl.
Two welcomes. That's kind of nice. What we're doing is we're looking at this series called Encounter. People Jesus met then and now. And this series was developed not just out of thinking inspirationally about what we should do as our next series. It was looking at what's going on across the globe at the moment. This first session, I'll make this really clear, this first session will be quite different from all of the other sessions that I'm doing. And there are a few. So what I want to do in this first session is give you some background to Encounter the series. What were we thinking? What's going on in Western nations? Which impacts you here in Macau? And what does the future look like for the church? As a way of introducing this, you may have already seen this, but if you haven't, or even if you have, hopefully I pressed the right button. Here is the trailer for Encounter, and then I'm going to give you some background. When Jesus walked the earth, he had encounters with people seeking God. He reached out to the desperate and the outsiders.
People often reject the idea of God or the supernatural.
I knew I wanted a deeper life, as millions of people do.
The reason I believed Christianity was true is I didn't want it to be. I went looking for Buddhism because I thought it would suit me. I went looking for Wicca because I thought it would suit me. I went looking for things I was interested in. But Christianity, or specifically Christ, came to me without me looking for them.
There was a sense deep inside of me, a real hunger or desire for something else. And I knew it was spiritual.
The question, therefore, is not, is there a God? But it's, what is that God like? And as Christians, our answer is Jesus.
Encounters with the divine aren't just strange or unusual ancient stories. They are part of modern life.
There was something about Jesus that made a tax collector get up, stop what he was doing, and immediately follow Jesus.
I don't think every demon in hell could have stopped me from wanting and getting what was on offer from Jesus Christ.
Who knew in the middle of your life, God willing, that such an encounter could still be available to you?
I feel like God's made sense of everything that I've been through in my life.
I heard this voice as a living voice, but I knew that something was happening, that I wasn't alone in my room reading this. That there was a divine presence.
There is no way to argue that
against that this man met God and God has changed his life?
But I kind of called him out, and I was like, God, now's your chance. Like, if there was ever a time, it's now. And I was like, say something, move something, like anything. And yeah, he did.
How did that change you?
It changed everything.
We travelled the world and talked with a diverse group of people, from a professor to a gay activist, an environmentalist to a drug addict, a journalist to a criminal. They all had a life-changing encounter with Jesus.
That's the difference, because beforehand it was religion, it was religious, but then when I had that encounter, there was a supernatural encounter where he invaded within inside me and took over.
She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped.
Her life is completely different.
Christ isn't somewhere distant, the other side of Pluto. He's nearer than my own breath.
Join us as we travel across the globe, uncovering encounters with Jesus that transformed lives then and now.
If sin doesn't matter, the cross is irrelevant. But if sin is this kind of spiritual cancer destroying our world, and you can't go to a doctor or a shrink or a politician or an influence to get it sorted, where do you go? 2.6 billion people in our world say, you go to Jesus Christ, who died on the cross.
Our hope is that you too may encounter Jesus and find faith, hope, and life. Not only is it coming soon, it's out now. I want to let you know that in every other session but this one, you're going to get an opportunity to have some discussion around some discussion questions. So at the end of this session, you'll be all given, not now, but at the end of the session, you'll be all given a discussion book. And the discussion guide has some opportunity for you to talk on your tables about what I'm talking about. You'll be pleased to know that I won't be speaking 9 times for 80 minutes. I know you're excited, but I'm excited by that. So what we're going to do is talk today, as I said, quite differently from every other session. In every other session, we're going to look at one of the episodes. We're going to show some clips out of an episode. We're going to talk about the person that Jesus met in the gospel stories, and then we're going to talk about others who've met Jesus today in that same space. We're going to talk about an encounter that Jesus has with 2 people in this session, but it's not in the series. It's an added extra. But it's a great way to kind of introduce the whole series to you and get a look at what we're talking about in this whole notion of encounter. But what I wanted to start with is where are we up to in kind of Western nations, and I'm incorporating Macau, even though that you sit between in a way, 2 great cultures of the globe. Now, what is happening in the West around Christianity, faith and belief and spirituality in the world? And for those of us in places like Australia, in the last 2 decades, we've actually had to deal with several kind of major shifts that looked like it was going to be the death of the Christian church, because that's what a lot of people were thinking. And one of them was a group called the New Atheists. Have people heard of the New Atheists? Have you heard of that term? If you haven't heard of the New Atheists, they're now old. Just wanted to break that to you. But they were referred to the New Atheists back in about 2005, and they were incredibly important for the next decade. The New Atheists were headed up by a group of 4 people, but 2 of the most prominent was a guy whose name was Richard Dawkins. Now, you might have heard of Richard Dawkins. He was a lecturer and teacher, professor at Oxford University, and he wrote a book called The God Delusion. Now, you don't have to be a genius to work out that he wasn't particularly fond of the Christian God when you write a book called The God Delusion. Now, just in case you think that was a bit of a fly-by-night book, It sold 7 million copies globally. It was enormously influential. And at that point of time, there was a bunch of people. Another one was the late Christopher Hitchens. There were actually, you love this term, there were 4 atheists that were known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Pretty positive term. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. 2 of them have since passed away. Christopher Hitchens and a guy called Daniel Dennett, and there was a 4th, his name was Sam Harris. Now the interesting thing at that point of time, and I'll come back to this later, just remember this, that point of time Christopher Hitchens wrote a book called God Is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Now the interesting thing is across the West, in the elite universities and across the kind of intelligentsia, if I can use that term, that was not pushed back on, that was embraced. That book sold across the globe. These 4 people went to conferences all over the world, which is kind of odd, because why would you do a conference about something you don't believe in? But that was what was happening. And it's a bit like in the, if I can use this term, the public square of discussion. It was a bit like they dominated the public square. So you had this whole group of people that were kind of pushing back on faith and belief and basically saying that that's something from a past era. We've moved past that. We think it's a delusion. We think it's not great. Not only, what's important here, what you've got to remember is, in lots of places, in lots of spaces in this area, there was this notion that, okay, have you heard the term you do you? In the West, that's a big term. In Australia, they talk about you do you. In other words, you do what you do, and I'm going to tolerate your worldview. And Christianity, faith and belief, and all the world global religions were seen as, well, if that's good for you, fantastic. But it's not for me. The intriguing thing is what happened with the New Atheists and Christopher Hitchens' book, and this all came out of the 9/11 terrorist attack in the US, which was seen as a religious event. It was basically, Christianity has gone from being moved to the irrelevant box. You do you, that works for you, that's fine, we'll tolerate it. It moved from the irrelevant box to the dangerous box. This is actually not irrelevant. This is bad for our communities. And that became a very big tension point for the Christian church in the West. But there were a couple of other things happening at the same time. One of them was the same-sex marriage debate and the LGBTIQ plus debate around that. And when countries like Australia, in England, in America, in numbers of these nations, there were huge debates about whether people who were same-sex attracted should be able to be married, because it was basically illegal for them to be married. Now, in that debate, the church was one of the groups, not the only group, but the Christian church was probably the main group who was seen publicly as saying, we don't think this is a great option for the community. And there was a lot of pushback against the Christian church in that sense. There was also another awful thing, which was the revelations that occurred around this period of time about abuse of children within Christian organisations and institutions. Many of you would maybe not have heard of this, but in Australia this was a big deal. So in Australia we had a Royal Commission into the institutional abuse of children. And every day, now it wasn't just churches, there were other institutions, but the churches seemed to be front and centre of this debate. And every day when this Royal Commission was on, you would open the newspapers, you would read it online, you would see your social media post, and it was basically full of awful stories of what happened within churches. And the intrigue, one of the places to get a bit of a feel for this is a movie called Spotlight. Some of you might have seen that movie. The movie Spotlight was about the Catholic Church in Boston, the city in northeast America called Boston, and it was about the Catholic Church in Boston. And Spotlight was a part of the Boston Globe newspaper, and it was a group that were doing investigative journalism. And it's an interesting look at why this is a huge problem. I think most people across all kind of institutions in nations and places like Macau know that there are individuals that do the wrong thing, and individuals that are corrupt, or individuals that are abusive. We all know that's the case. And the church, tragically, has had those individuals. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, in many places, the church covered for the individual. The church covered it up. And in Boston, when a priest was caught doing the wrong thing with some young child, rather than being pushed out of the priesthood or pushed out of the church, they were simply moved to another parish. And there were not just 2 or 3, there were dozens of them. And when this broke, it was really awful. So you have the new atheists, you have the debate about same-sex marriage, you have the position of abuse within the church in lots of different places. And then the last thing was a falling percentage of those who identify as Christian. So there's this notion there's less and less people say they're Christians. So if you're in Australia, you know what Australia is because Stephen comes from it. You know Australia is a nation, often seen as a Christian nation. If you go back to 1970, in 1970 they would do a census every 4 years, they still do it, and you would have a box that said, yes, I'm a Christian. That box in 1970 was ticked about 85 to 90% of people ticked a Christian box. That has steadily dropped from 1970 to last year, it was 44% ticked a Christian box. So you can see that steep decline in the number of people who identify as Christian. Now when you put these 4 things together, you kind of think, and lots of people thought, well, getting to the end of the Christian church. At some point, the last church will close, they'll turn the lights off, and that'll be the end of that. And it looked like the Christian church was kind of on the way out. Only people like ourselves that don't have anything better to do in their lives will continue to turn up the church. The church is a dying institution. Let me introduce you to Jack, because we're now in a new day. And this is where Encounter fits in. We interviewed Jack for the new men's series we're just releasing. I'm going to show you a trailer later in the week of what the new men's series looks like. Jack went to a Catholic, not church, a school. The school was a Catholic school. And Jack, both his parents were teachers at Catholic schools. And Jack would be turning up to the Catholic school. His grandmother was quite involved in the Catholic Church, but not his parents. And at the end of school, when we interviewed him, he said, well, that was the end of that. We're finished with, I'm finished with religion, I'm finished with the church, I'm just going to get on with my life. The interesting thing that happened with Jack is in his mid-20s, he's now a school teacher himself, and he's asking some questions about what life's about. He's also asking, this is important, he's also asking some questions about what is it to be a male. Because that's a bit difficult in Western countries now. What is it to be a bloke? What is it to be masculine? Is masculinity all toxic? Is there anything positive about masculinity? And he's thinking about this, so he starts to read some books. And one of the books he read was written by a guy called Jordan Peterson. I'll come back to Jordan Peterson. He's written a book called 12 Rules for Life. Important point here, Peterson is not a Christian, but I'll tell you why he's important later. And when he's reading the book, he thought, you know, this guy's kind of interested in spiritual things. He mentions it quite often, which is what Peterson does. And as he gets to the end of the book, he thought, you know, maybe I should look into this spiritual thing. Maybe I should look into kind of, you know, faith a bit more. So what does he do? He doesn't go to church. He doesn't read a book. He doesn't go see his friends. He gets on YouTube, as all of you do. And all of us do. You know, you can't fix something these days. You don't ask anybody. You look it up on YouTube. He looks it up on YouTube. And he starts watching YouTube videos. And after watching YouTube videos for a number of months, he had this thought. I think I should go to church. And the intriguing thing is that Jack is not unusual. On Western nations across the globe at the moment, there are lots of young men especially turning up to church without, seemingly surprisingly so. And what we're seeing with Jack is a new day. And what the key about this is, and here's my point of encouragement to all of you, wherever Mikhail sits in the cultural milieu of the world, in the West there's a shift in the culture. And rather than the Christian church going downhill on its way to death, there's actually a new day. And one of the things that's really surprising about this, and this is kind of odd, but think about this, the influence of people going back to church and taking Christian faith more seriously is due to people who aren't actually Christians. Which is sort of odd, wouldn't you think? And then what you've got is a whole bunch of people who are thinking through what it means to be a human that's doing well in life. And here are some of the names of people who aren't actually Christians that are influencing. I'll get to some that are influencing. And these are prominent authors, academics, thinkers, and cultural influencers. And the first is a guy called Jordan Peterson. Now, many of you might have heard of Jordan Peterson. He's written a book called, the book, as I said before, 12 Rules for Life. Now, here's a way of demonstrating the shift in the culture. What did I say about Christopher Hitchens? He wrote a book called God Is Not Good, How Religion Poisons Everything. You know what Jordan Peterson's latest book is called? We Who Wrestle with God. Now, Peterson is not a Christian. He's very close. His daughter is a Christian. As a matter of interest, for those of you who are in this space, Jordan Peterson right now is a very unwell man, and a lot of people are praying for him. He doesn't. There are some people who think he's a Christian, but I don't think he is. He hasn't actually come out and said that he is. But he has a deep interest in spiritual things. And he's interested in the fact that what Christianity has done for the West is incredibly important. The next is Peter. I'm going to skip Peter McCashin. Let me go to Tom Holland. Have you seen the Spider-Man movie? It's not that Tom Holland. So I'll let you know, a grave disappointment to a number of the young women in the room. Not that Tom Holland, a different Tom Holland. Let me tell you about Tom Holland. Tom Holland is an English guy. If you've watched Jesus the Game Changer 2, you would have seen him at one point. He's a cultured English guy. He's not a Christian. And he's loved the Greco-Roman world. Loved the Greeks, loved the Romans, loved that whole world. And while he's studying the Greco-Roman world over a period of time, now hear me carefully here, as an historian, not as a religious person. He's looking at the Greco-Roman world from a historian's point of view. And this is what he realized. How come the Greeks and the Romans had values that were so far from where we live in the West today? Like the Greeks, the Romans did stuff that we would never abide by. They took over the Gauls, which we would now call France. They killed 1 million of them. They enslaved 1 million more. And nobody said, is that a bad idea? Have you seen the Australian actor Russell Crowe in Gladiator? Have you seen that? That's when Russell Crowe was sort of fit and cut. He's sort of gone to seed a little these days. Russell Crowe is in Gladiator. Love the movie Gladiator. Think about this. Imagine having a class of people whose only job in life was to kill each other for the entertainment of the crowds. We're not talking about fake deaths. We're not talking about splashing some tomato sauce around to make it look gory. We're talking about actually killed each other for the entertainment of the crowds. And again, nobody thought, is that a good idea? Why would that happen? And here's Tom Holland. He's looking at all of this within the culture of the Greco-Roman world that he loved the Spartans. And he's thinking, so why do we have a set of morals and values today where those things, whether you're Christian or not, where those things would never be allowed to happen? Why do we have a world today that's like that? And it's so different from then. And you know what his answer is? Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus, the early church, the writings of Paul, and the church over the centuries changed the way that Western cultures worked and gave Western cultures a set of values that are incredibly important. In fact, one of the things that Tom Holland writes is you don't have to be a believer in the death and resurrection of Jesus to be deeply influenced by Christian values and culture. In fact, he would say that people in Western nations, and I would think probably Hong Kong and Macau would fit into that space, in those nations are actually swimming in Christian waters because the key values are Christian values. Let me give you one value. I could go on about this forever, but you could just watch Jesus the Game Changer, as many of you have, and you would get this story. Let me give you one value that we're talking about in Jesus the Game Changer. the equality and dignity of every individual. Now let me ask you this: are all people created? Are all people equal? Are all people valued equally? Is every life important? And we'll all go, of course they are. Now, as an aside, we don't actually live that out particularly well. Cultures don't get that right often. We often don't treat people equally. But we have a value that everybody's worth is the same. In the Australian culture, we get to vote. And everybody who votes, their vote is worth exactly the same. We're in a culture where if there's a disabled child, we do everything we can for that disabled child. Because they're valued and they're seen as having dignity and worth. Here's the question. Where did that value come from? Now, most of us think, well, humans have always thought that. And people around the world think that. Both those statements are actually wrong. Humanity has not treated people with dignity and work and equality across the years. And across the globe now, in lots of places, there are plenty of places where individuals aren't treated equally with dignity and worth. And Holland's point is this: that is a Christian idea. So what's happening is you have people like Holland and Joe Rogan. You know who Joe Rogan is?
Yeah.
Joe Rogan's got probably the biggest podcast in the globe. 190 million people listen to Joe Rogan. He's not a Christian. But Joe Rogan had a guest just recently, and the guest's name was Wes Huff.
Yep.
Now, Wes Huff was on Joe Rogan's show because Wes Huff had been on another show where he debated an atheist, and it hadn't gone well for the atheist. In fact, it went really badly for the atheist. In fact, the atheist was so angry about what had happened, he sent his mate, who was the host of the podcast, a cease and desist letter from his lawyer saying you cannot broadcast that conversation. Guess what happened? Millions of people have now seen it, including Joe Rogan. Now here's the point. Joe Rogan invites Wes Huff onto his show. They have a 3-hour conversation. Okay, I got to 45 minutes. Lots of people listen to the 3 hours. But here's the important piece. Joe Rogan is positively disposed to Wes Huff. So what you're seeing across the globe is the fact that, I'm going to miss, in fact, and then the last one is the impact of the death of Charlie Kirk. Did that get a lot of press here, Stephen? Yeah. And remarkable.
All over social media.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Charlie Kirk ran a thing called Turning Point US, a Turning Point in America. He was a big supporter of Donald Trump. I wouldn't endorse everything Charlie Kirk said, but Charlie Kirk was a committed Christian who would go to universities in the US and debate people. Anybody wanted to ask him a question, and he would debate them. Thousands of people would turn up for an opportunity to ask him questions or debate with him. Again, he's only 31, and he was shot on a university campus. 100,000 people turned up to his funeral in person. It was a mixture between a political event and a funeral, and there's a whole bunch of, it's problematical, I know. The issue is probably 100 to 150 million people watch this online. And what the information coming out is across American churches, people are just turning up to church. They're starting to go to church again. So what are we saying in all this? That there's a new day. Something different is happening. And that's where Encounter fits in. I'll skip that one. Let me just tell you about, so one of the ways that this is happening, one of the influences this is happening across the globe, is that people who are making a difference, a decision to follow Jesus in this environment. Most of you would never heard of a lady whose name was Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a Somalian, born up in Somalia in Africa, moved to Nairobi in Kenya. In Nairobi in Kenya, she was radicalized by the Muslim Brotherhood into the Muslim faith. After that, she then moved to Europe and actually became left the Muslim faith, stepped away from it, wrote a book called Infidel, and got involved with a new atheist movement. I wouldn't say she's good friends, but she's well known to people like Richard Dawkins. In November 2023, Ian Hershiali, wrote an article, and the article was in a magazine called the Unheard magazine. And in that magazine, this is part of the article. The magazine was called Why I'm Now a Christian. And she said this: I have also turned to Christianity because I ultimately found life without any spiritual solace unendurable. Indeed, very nearly self-destructive. Atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and the purpose of life? She and her husband, his name's Niall Ferguson, and their 2 children have now been baptised in a church in the UK, and she continues to she's actually been on podcast debates with Richard Dawkins. So what you're seeing, and I won't go to the next one, what you're seeing is a huge shift, and also a shift in the Gen Z. Gen Z, what you're seeing in the UK at the moment and in the US is that Gen Z, 17 and 25-year-olds, have the lowest identity as an atheist and an highest identity as being spiritually interested. It's a new day. It's a time of change. And I think this statement out of the Encounter series by a guy called Martin Shaw. Martin Shaw is in episode number 1, but we won't actually do episode number 1. We'll start without my times with episode 2. But here's something Martin Shaw says.
In the middle of that long period of being alone, all the things that I'd been hiding in my own heart, the longing for a religious dimension to my life, for something with greater meaning, with depth, it all came to the surface. And while that didn't articulate itself in the form of Christ at that moment, I knew I wanted a deeper life, as millions of people do.
And I think that's the statement that the atheist movement, the new atheist movement, couldn't answer. I knew I wanted a deeper life. Rod Dre has written a book, and in the book he spoke to a young man. The young man said this: I believe it all, but I'm desperate for a sense of enchantment. We all want that. That life is beyond just getting through the humdrum of every day, of making sure we don't go broke, that we get a good job, that our relationships won't work. We want a sense of enchantment, that life's important, that something's that's going on here. We want to have an encounter with God. And I'll skip that. And we live in the midst of a cynical age. And yet in this cynical age, we tend to think that the cynical age is actually a new thought. But it's not. And I want to go to an encounter. I've looked at my watch. I'll need to do this quickly. I want to go to encounter, and if you're following this, if you've got your Bible, you might want to look at Luke chapter 24 with me. And in Luke chapter 24, this is a well-known passage, and it's in Luke chapter 24. Now, this is an encounter that's not in the series, but it's a great way of looking at expanding across the series. So in Luke chapter 24, this is where Jesus is risen. And you'll know the story well. You'll know the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women, verse 1, this is, took the spices they had prepared, and they went to the tomb. And they found the stone had been rolled away, and when they entered, they did not find a body. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood before them. And in their fright, the women bowed their faces to the ground. But the man said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen. Remember how he would told you while he was still with you in Galilee." Now, here's a few Bibles being passed around for those who don't have one on your phone or have one with you. So we're looking at Luke chapter 24, and we just looked at the first 7 verses. And here's the women who come to the tomb, and you'll know that there are several women, one of which was Mary Magdalene. And we're going to look at Mary Magdalene's experience here. We're going to look at that in about the last session we have together. So hang in there till the last session we have together. And what happened then? And then it said, when they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and those among them. And then it says, Dr. Luke gives a little list. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna Mary, the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. So the women have gone to the tomb. to anoint the body. When they get there, there is no body, but there are two angels, and they rush back to tell the disciples. Well, now if you put the stories in the Gospels together, you know that Peter and John and James rush back to the tomb themselves, look in, there's nobody there. So this is the situation. What we know in John's Gospel, which we'll look in session number 9, that Mary meets Jesus. Remember that? We're going to talk about that later, so I'll skip that. But you know, Mary meets Jesus in person. So when it says there, when they came back from the tomb, they told them that all the things that had happened. What are they saying? They turned up and say there is no body. There were angels at the tomb telling us that Jesus is alive. And Mary is saying, I met him in person. Let me read this verse to you, verse 11. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Get your head around that little verse. They did not believe them because their words seemed to them like nonsense. We're going to look in that ninth session about other responses to the knowledge that Jesus had risen from the dead. We tend to think that we're in a modern age, in this fabulous scientific age, with all the learning we have across the globe, with our fabulous universities, all of our deep learning, all of our archaeology and history, that we tend to think that we're more cynical than back in those sort of more simple days, because we're so much more educated and intelligent. You know what's true? Human nature is cynical. Human nature finds it hard to believe the miraculous. The disciples, who should have been the people most ready to believe, don't. And two of them that are in the room then go home. Now, I want to make this as quick as I can. These two people were close to Jesus. We know from if we read the whole passage, they were in the room with Jesus. They were in the room when they heard the women. They'd heard all that Jesus had said. They'd experienced all that Jesus had done in healing. And in, what do we read? If you look at verse 13. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus. They were going home. In other words, after all Jesus has said and all Jesus has done, they'd had enough. They'd given up. They were going home. At the end of this passage, they run back to Jerusalem to tell the disciples what had happened. So what happens between I've had enough, I don't believe, I'm going home, to running back to tell the disciples what had happened? They encountered Jesus. That's what happened. And there are 5 things that happens in this encounter that I want to point to really quickly. They were walking along and somebody comes along next to them and says, what are you talking about? And they stood with their faces downcast. And they said, are you the only person in Jerusalem who has no idea what's happened? In other words, really? You have no idea? It's about like somebody saying today, and this is a bad example, but I'll use it anyway. It's like somebody saying today, gee, I'm not so sure about Trump getting elected again as the President of America. And somebody said to you, is Trump the President of America? What would you say? Seriously? Have you been under a rock for the last 9 months? Have you no idea what's going on? That's what this interaction's like. Are you the only person that doesn't know? And Jesus says, so what happened? I want you to note, if you read this through, but you won't read all the verses, what do they do next? They have a conversation. It's simply a conversation. It wasn't that suddenly there was this interaction of a theological type, or it wasn't that here was this moment of a training in evangelism. It was just a conversation. And in the conversation, the person of Jesus comes, the history of all that had happened around Jesus, even though we're talking to Jesus and they didn't know it, comes up out of the conversation. One of the other people in episode 1 is a guy called David Bennett. And David Bennett had gone to university, moved away from faith, had no interest in faith, had a lifestyle decisions that were away from the kingdom of God, goes to a pub one night and sees a lady across the room that he wants to meet. It wasn't anything romantic. She'd won the world's largest small film festival. She'd won it. Short film festival, like 4 minutes. And he saw her. He was involved in university politics. He wrote for the university paper, and he thought, I'd love to talk with her because she'd make a great story for the university paper. So he goes over to talk to Genevieve, and it was all about what? A conversation. That's all it was. He actually said to her, so what made you put together the short film? And she said, well, God told me. And he said, which God? And she said, Jesus. And he was deeply disappointed, like really disappointed. And they had a conversation about that. I want to come back to David. But it's interesting that it starts with a conversation. What happens next? Now, keep in mind these people are suffering from trauma and grief. And you wouldn't say that Jesus, while he's a wonderful example, this is not his most pastoral moment. Okay? And Jesus says to him, how foolish you are and slow to believe what the prophets have told you. In dealing with people with trauma and grief, that's not the line to use. Just keep that in mind. But Jesus said, how slow you are. Like, are you serious? And what does it go on to say? And beginning with Moses and the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. So what happens is first is conversation. Second is the Bible. Jesus goes back to the Bible and he points out all the things in the Old Testament that pointed to the Messiah, Jesus himself, coming. One of the people you would have seen, he was in a church, his name's Archbishop Kanishka Raphael. I'm going to introduce him again to you in the next session. But Kanishka Raphael, who's the Archbishop of the Sydney Diocese, was a Buddhist. And he came to faith because a friend gave him a Bible. He sat up one night to read it because he promised that he would. It was a hot Sydney night. He couldn't get to sleep. And when he's reading John's Gospel, God spoke to him. And he came to faith out of Buddhist faith. Remarkable story. Secondly, there was the Bible. The third thing we see in this passage is worship. Remember the piece in this story? You all know this story. As they approached the village they were going to, Jesus continued as if he was going further. They said to him strongly, stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day is almost over. So he went and had a meal with them. When they were at the table, verse 30, when they were at the table, he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and said, this is my body. I mean, what was that? That was communion. That was the Lord's Supper. Just a few days before, Jesus had done this with them. And in that moment of worship, they see Jesus clearly for who he was. Now, what we also know in this moment is that worship is important. And I won't go into the story of Lonzo Paul, I'll leave that for another time. But people coming to meet Jesus in worship is incredibly important. Invite people to church. Give them the opportunity to share with you in your church. Don't be afraid of allowing people to be a part of the kingdom of the community of faith before they make decisions of faith, because the community of faith is important. When their eyes were opened and they recognized him, what we see in that moment is let me just see. Let me go to the last one first. And they said, verse 32, look at verse 32. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures? Burning hearts. What was Martin Shaw saying? I knew I wanted a deeper life. All the way through this series, we will meet people who wanted a deeper life, whose hearts were burning, who were looking for faith. And the last thing is the miraculous. Look at what it says, which I just read before. Verse 31, then their eyes were opened and they recognized him and he disappeared from their sight. Miraculous. It was not expected. Here is this miraculous moment where Jesus reveals himself to them. Remember, the miraculous still happens. Miracles still occur. God still works in remarkable ways. So remember me telling you about, I'm going to wrap up on this, remember you telling me about David Bennett? Talk to Genevieve. They're in the pub. They're in a, just sitting in the corner of an Australian hotel, just having a conversation. Genevieve, we interviewed Genevieve as well, said, I just wanted David to know that God loved him. So she said to David, can I pray for you? David said, well, I'm a good agnostic. Knock yourself out. Good luck. So in a corner of the pub, she leans over, puts her hand on his shoulder, and prayed a simple prayer that he would know that God loves him. David said in that moment, it was like somebody put a pinprick in the top of his head and poured warm oil all through his body. Totally revolutionized him. He said, I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, this is what I was made for. And God changed his life in a heartbeat. He's been following Jesus ever since. He now lives in Oxford. He's done a PhD doctorate in Oxford. He's written a book. He travels around the globe speaking. Why did that happen?
I invited him to come for this term, and he turned us. He's not able. He's too busy.
Oh no!
But we got you, which is better.
I know. How lucky was that? Yeah. You were very generous.
I'm giving up on him.
David Bennett is a remarkable person, but his story is about the miraculous. So what we're seeing in this is a new day. And what we're going to do is look at the different encounters that Jesus had then, and people Jesus met then, and what those encounters that are Jesus is happening today. We're going to have a 5-minute break. I'm going to change the PowerPoint. We're going to give you one of the each one of the discussion guides, and then we'll get into session 2. The box is over there. Just stand up for 2 minutes.
One thing. Please only take one discussion guide, because we have other people coming. So one per person. Thank you.
You're watching.
You oversleep or something? What? You oversleep or something?
Sleep?
Did you oversleep or something?
No, I wake up early, but then we just surprisingly, is someone taking a sleep?
Nah.
How many of you? That's the only issues I have.
The what?
The Bible there.
Which master?
Yeah,
Congratulations.
yeah, that's surprising.
Really?
Are we doing discussions? Let's see. If we're doing a discussion about the Roman history or not,
Actually, it's interesting because a lot of the things that you're making are things that you try and remove
ran into this girl yesterday. What? I had no idea who he was.
He does music cameos. Just I'm surprised you haven't seen his
Just walking out of McDonald's.
You sent me the photo, right? You sent me the photo because I'm showing you'll see like
I don't care.
But there's this one guy who just seems both wait for the I think it was just the bigger guy they were front one.
So I didn't know
But it's
yeah.
so the whole thing that is kind of like I shared that with his testimony. And I think
The camp schedule is on page 8 and 9. This is from last week. So I just got well, yes. I guess if she was
Yes, I believe a very senior. Yes.
the schedule of today's program. It's in here. Page 9 and 10. It's extra copies anyway. Can you check? I couldn't see. Page 8 and 9. You can find it.
Hey, welcome back, buddy. We missed you guys. We lost you.
Oh no,
I'm so glad you could make it. I'm so glad you could make it. Welcome, welcome.
I don't care about banks.
He was in old part of McDonald's. This is like central. Yeah. Central. This is Central Y. I saw it. Oh, look, yeah, that's a spider. Roundabout. But it's not a park, yeah. Roundabout. Right? This is not roundabout. Where were you? Nova Park. So, look. Is that so, yeah, that's so wacky.
I was there with John. I was there with John. We saw a track and they're about to check his room.
That's much. Hey, what the heck? You see how that's what everyone just showed up.
Okay, we've got some people still coming to join us. We're all good to go.
Say something. I think we're going to have some discussion in a moment, and so I just want to suggest that we sit in homogeneous groups, if you're comfortable. So we've got some youth here. I'd like some youth leaders to go and join them, please. Just a couple, one or two, not all of them. Maybe just even one, because you guys are, even one's enough, I think, or two. And John, you can join these guys, this group. Maybe we could have a Tagalog. You guys Ilocano or Tagalog? Whatever. Okay. So I think it might be good to join a group that's like you. We've got like 3 gentlemen here. And then we've got Brian and Brian, the Brian's table over here. Maybe you could combine together. Maybe Adarita and Willem, you could join the Brians. And we've got the Myanmar speaking Burmese or Karen. I don't know what you guys. Are you all Karen or mix, right? Yeah. So Myanmar Burmese. Okay. All right. So be happy. Just tonight, guys. Just a word of warning. For the dinner tonight, every seat is going to be filled and more. There'll be one table with 11, and every table will have 10 or 11. So that means we have to include everybody. And we don't have allocated seating. We have free seating. So that means if there's a couple or a family, then singles might have to move. Do you understand? We might have to, just please be sensitive and include everybody and make sure everybody's with their family, and those of us who are single, you can move, and you got the picture. Okay, thank you.
Terrific. So what we're going into the series now, keeping all of that in mind as the background to why we produced Encounter, some of our thinking behind it. And the first is, so we're looking at encounters that Jesus had when he was in his ministry. And the first encounter we're going to look at is actually from episode 2 of the series. Interesting, episode 1, the encounter with episode 1 is Mary. Now, as you get, the encounter where Jesus was involved, the encounter for Mary was the angel. So here we have, now if you want to look up in your Bible, it's Mark chapter 2, verse 13 to 17. Levi the tax collector, but it's also page 12 of your discussion guide. It's there. So page 12 of the discussion guide. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Here is Jesus talking with the outsiders, the people who don't fit in, the people who are not your people. Have you been in that circumstance with a group of people that are not your people? We filmed in Lalibela a couple of years ago. Lalibela is in Ethiopia. And Lalibela in Ethiopia is quite a unique place because there are 12 churches that are hewn out of rock. You should look them up at some point. They're basically, if you can imagine the side of a mountain that's completely solid rock, and then they cut into the rock and leave a building in the middle, like the shape of a building, and then they burrowed into that shape and created a church. And these are UNESCO, like Morrison Chapel, UNESCO listed, and they're quite remarkable. When we filmed with these people, we turned up on Good Friday, and the guy in the shorts is our cameraman Luke, and we were filming in Lalibela. These were not my people. We did not fit in. In fact, I did make a terrible mistake, because they are so, they consider they're Christians, but their theology is kind of a bit interesting. It's a very interesting mix between Old Testament and New Testament. If you look up the Halawatu people, that they actually believe they hold the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia. In each of their churches, they have a holiest of holies, as in the Old Testament temple. So it's a very interesting mix. But I accidentally walked in with my shoes on, and that is a huge no-no. And so it was this moment of like, oh, am I going to be okay? And they kind of were gracious to me, but it was one of those moments where it's not your people. It's interesting that, you know, if I go to the casinos of Macau, I'm not used to that space. Lots of pubs and clubs and nightclubs, I'm not used to those spaces. The interesting thing is, that's what a lot of people think about church. The intriguing thing is that the religious leaders of Jesus' time had radars for people who don't fit in. They picked the people, they were good at picking the people who didn't fit in, who didn't have the right set of values, who didn't have the right set of attitudes, who mixed with the wrong sorts of people. And it was intriguing that Levi was one of those people. I'm going to show you over the next, today and tomorrow, some clips out of Encounter. Now this just gives a different way of introducing material. And this clip is a lady, this is both Mike and Lynn. Lynn Cowick, they're both PhDs in theology and New Testament scholarship. Lynn is in Houston Seminary in Houston in Texas, and we interviewed her there. Mike Bird, Dr. Mike Bird, has written numbers of books. He's at Ridley College in Melbourne, which is in Melbourne, Australia. You might have heard, some of you might have heard of N.T. Wright. Mike Bird has written books with N.T. Wright at the moment, hosts of podcasts, and to Ask N.T. Wright Anything. So these two people have deep learning and information and experience in the Bible, in the background of the Bible. And here they are commenting on tax collecting.
Essentially, being a taxman was getting a franchise. You're allowed to man this trading station, you're allowed to work in this market, or you're on this border between two regions, and you're expected to get X number of dollars or coins or whatever it is to meet your quota. But anything beyond that, you keep for yourself.
Levi was collecting tax on the fish that had been taken from the Sea of Galilee and was now set to be sold. So there's your profit gone. You know, you work all night fishing, trying to, you know, just make a living, and then there's Levi there in his little tax booth taking your profit.
So what you would understand is the role of a tax collector, and many of you might know this, and you would have read tax collector in the Bible a lot. What you would understand is that tax collecting was collecting taxes from your people for a foreign power. So Rome, the Roman Empire was massive at this point, covered most of the known world at that point. And what Rome had done is had taken over Israel. And then what they did was they recruited local people to collect the taxes. So what they'd done is they go to someone like Levi, and Levi would basically bid for the opportunity to run a business which was to collect the taxes. Now taxes were collected on a few different things. One was they were in the north part of the Sea of Galilee. This is where this story happened. And there was a trade route from further north and east that came past Caesarea and the Sea of Galilee. One of the roles of tax collectors was to collect taxes from people as they travelled through. Another was to collect taxes from income, and as Lynn said, income from those who were fishing. And he would sit there with his booth, and it was his right to collect taxes from his own people to send to a foreign power. Now, three things were at stake here. One of those things was it was believed that they were corrupt. In fact, that you were collecting for a foreign power, but it was believed that you were corrupt. There was no system of checking whether you ripped people off. There was no way of knowing whether you took more taxes than you needed to. There was no way of checking whether you sent all the taxes that you collected to Rome. But the second thing is that you were actually mixing with those who were unclean and those who were sinners from the sense of an Old Testament teaching and from the Jewish people. Now, interesting, what we're going to do is we're going to meet other people in this series that were seen as unclean not because they were sinners. A leper was unclean not because he was a sinner but because of a skin condition. The woman with the bleed is unclean not because she's sinning but because of her condition. Levi, though, and the prostitutes were seen as those who sinned who actively acted against the parameters of God's word in the Old Testament. And sinners were deemed to be those who were outside and mixing, as we said, with those who were ceremonially unclean. And what Jesus does is he calls Levi. One of the things, a clip that you won't see, is it's interesting. If you notice that as you read that through, Jesus says, "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. And now, you kind of think there might have been more going on. Maybe Levi's listened to Jesus for some time. Maybe Levi's been considering this for some time. And there's a moment where Jesus calls him and he follows him. If you were choosing a group of people in that period of time, in the Greco-Roman world, Levi was an odd choice, wouldn't you think? Somebody who was not following Old Testament teaching, someone who was ostracized by the people of God at that point, someone who was collaborating with a foreign power. Why would you choose him? Do you know whose Levi's other's name is? Matthew. Levi became Matthew, writing Matthew's gospel, incredibly important. Here's what Lynn says about
One
Jesus.
of the amazing parts of Levi's story is that he gets a meal with Jesus. Sitting with someone at a meal at this time meant that you were in fellowship with them. It was a show of hospitality. But Jesus is to be this prophet from God that is stating God's law. And so people looked at, why Jesus, are you eating with Levi? Are you condoning his tax collecting job, which is basically stealing from the poor?
So here you have this idea that Jesus sits and eats with Levi. As Lynn said, that was not just, hey, let's grab a pizza together. There was actually quite a deep cultural notion of sitting and eating with somebody, and it was this notion of accepting, embracing, and allowing people to be a part of the kingdom of God. It's intriguing that Pete Gregg. Now, Pete Gregg is the guy in the middle picture there. He runs the 24/7 prayer movement across the globe. He's involved in Lectio Divina, which is a daily devotion. He's quite well known in that space. And Pete Gregg talks about the idea of what churches are like. And he said the interesting thing is that churches end up feeling a bit like country clubs for nice people. Everybody turns up and everybody's nice, everybody's dressed nicely. He said, you know, when you go to church, you know how most of you will do this. You'll leave your, well, the women, most of the blokes probably don't have handbags. And if you do, we should have a conversation later. But it's probably something about your culture I'm not understanding. You know, you turn up at church and you'll leave your handbag on the seat and go to the bathroom. Why? Because it's a totally safe environment. Why? Because you know everybody there. He said, you shouldn't be able to do that. There should be people within your church with questionable character. Why? Because that's what the church is about. So there should be people out the front smoking or vaping. And we probably think, well, that's not very good. But his point is this. The church is supposed to be a place that gathers in the Levi's and his mates, not someone who pushes them aside. We give the impression, we actually give the impression by the way we function that people are not welcome because everything's so nice, so well done, so comfortable, so safe. And yet the church shouldn't just necessarily about that. I think what we need to do is allow people to test their faith in the community without giving up the morality of the church. And that's the tricky piece. The church ought to be a place where people come and test their faith and consider ideas, not a place where it's just the settled believers who come. One of the stories that I didn't tell earlier, but I'll tell you now, is a guy called Alonzo Paul. Now, Alonzo, we interviewed him in Oxford, because that's where he is, but Alonzo grew up in Canada. And in Canada, as a young man, his parents divorced, he got involved in the wrong group of people. He started smoking weed at the age of about 12 or 13. He then got into heavier drugs, and by the time he was kind of late teens, early 20s, he would go to a shop that he was working at, and he would do his first line of coke on on the cash register in the morning. That was his life. He ended up one night, he was out with a mate. They were doing drugs. They went home, smoked some weed. The friend had a drug-induced psychotic moment. And Alonzo was asleep on the couch, and his mate came at him with a machete because his mate believed that a voice was telling him to cut Alonzo's head off. And he almost succeeded. The long and the short of it is he did survive. He went to hospital. When he came out of hospital, his sister talked to him and said, "Why don't you come to church?" And I said to Alonzo, "What did you think about going to church?" And he said, I already felt I'd ruined my life. I already felt I was really a waste of time as a person. I already felt shame about who I was. If I go to church, all I will feel is more shame. Aaron McKittrick, as you're about to hear a bit of Aaron's story. I said to Aaron, what were you growing up? Again, came from a broken home. Dad wasn't around. Got into a death metal band. So he was a singer in a death metal band. He said if I believed anything, I was probably a Satanist. A friend of his invited him to hear his band play. He turned up, his band was actually quite good. And at the end of it, he was about to go up to his mate to talk to him, and he said, I'm about to walk up, and then this guy turns on the stage and starts preaching, and he's like, oh, this is church. Now, I don't think it was actually church, but that was the impression that he got. And here he starts to explore faith and what he believed. Here's what happened to Aaron.
But as I said earlier, I've been a part of and I'd seen a lot of evil in the world, and so to believe that was really, really hard. But I kind of called him out, and I was like, God, now's your chance. Like, if there was ever a time, it's now. And you got to do something. And I was like, say something, move something, like anything. And yeah, he did. I heard my name. And then he said, I love you. And I just broke. Yeah. And it was like, kind of, in a sense, the first time I'd really heard that and like fully believed it. Like there was a weightiness in what was said that I'd never heard before. And I really believed it.
How did that change you?
It changed everything.
And that's Aaron's story. Aaron, as the lead singer of a death metal band, is not your normal recruit for your local church. The guy who's doing coke on the machine that he's at the cash register, who's going out at night smoking weed in nightclubs. He's not your usual recruit for the church. One of the other ladies who's married to Aaron now, she was in both the New Age and the occultic movement, and she did that from when she was 5 years old. She's not your normal recruit for the local church. Just like Levi and the prostitutes weren't normal recruits for the local church. But that's why the church exists. Not just for those on the inside, but for those who aren't there, for those who are looking, for those who are struggling. The outsider is the people that Jesus often had encounters with, and they were deeply influenced by him. The outsider is the person that the church ought to be touching, but it's complex. Normally, what I've got, each time there's a bunch of questions, but we've got morning tea coming up. So for 5 minutes around your table, answer this question. How do you think the Morrison Chapel, your church or your group, how could you be more open to outsiders? I'm not saying you're not open. I'm saying what could you do that might embrace the outsider? Now you might start thinking this, gosh, I don't know any lead singers of death metal bands. That's okay, because there are lots of outsiders. There are lots of people who don't normally fit into the church, who might, in this new moment of interest in faith, be looking at church. So one of the ways that you can help make the Morrison Chapel more welcoming to the people that we might describe as outsiders. You got that? Fabulous, do that. I know you're going to want to do this for 20 minutes, but you need to know the morning feast starting very soon. So you might want to move to that as well. But at least have a share around your table on that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Fellas, getting back in. Start by answering the question. How do you think you can be more welcoming to outsiders? Huh? What's your understanding of when you say when you bring outsiders?